Thank you. Willie Earl Dow lived in Jackson, Mississippi, and he seemed to always find himself on the wrong side of the law. You see, Willie had a drinking problem, and he had a habit of taking things that did not belong to him in order to fund his drinking. His escapades would often get him arrested and standing before Circuit Court Judge Joe Pygott. One year, Willie was serving time in the penitentiary, and he wrote Judge Pygott a letter. He said, "Judge, I do believe I have been in here long enough this time, and I would appreciate it if you would write to the parole board and ask them to let me out." The judge did, and Willie was released. About 6 weeks later, Willie got to drinking again. This time, he stole his friend's watch and the keys to his friend's car. His friend called the sheriff, and once again, Willie was arrested and standing before Judge Pygott. When it came time to levy the sentence, the judge said to him, "Mr. Dow, I am very disappointed in you. I gave you a chance, and in less than 2 months, you are back doing the same thing again. I just don't understand it." Willie said, "Well, Judge, I'm disappointed in you too." The courtroom got deathly quiet. 4 years ago, I was here, and you were sitting in that same chair, wearing that same robe, and delivering this same lecture. I would have thought that a man of your caliber would have made the Supreme Court by now. Mr. Dow, I was going to sentence you to 5 years. But seeing as how you are so perceptive, I believe I will only sentence you to 3. And he did. Many years later, Joe Pygott retired from the bench. And they held a little ceremony for him over at the courthouse to hang his portrait. Just before the ceremony began, in walked Willie Earl. The judge saw him and went up to him. "Mr. Dow, I am so glad to see you." "Well," Willie said, "I heard they were hanging Judge Pygott at the courthouse today, and I didn't want to miss it." This is a true story told by Joe Pygott as part of the National Public Radio StoryCorps project. StoryCorps is a nationwide effort to collect and record the stories of everyday people. It's interesting to me that when the judge had an opportunity in that StoryCorps booth to talk about the things in his life that mattered, he told this story about Willie Earl. I share the story with you this morning because it says something to me about how we impact the world. We don't always know when we are going to have an opportunity to have impact. I mean, I'm sure that Joe Pygott never would have believed that he would have been part of the effort that changed Willie's life. And I'm quite sure that Willie Earl Dow never had any idea that he would leave a lasting impression on Joe Pygott. But that is, in fact, the way it goes. In our everyday lives, in our everyday work, suddenly there is the opportunity to have an impact. And how we respond in those moments to those opportunities has the potential to make a big difference. Now, you are facing a lot of opportunities right now. Yeah, granted, I'm using the word opportunities. You're frequently using the phrase unrealistic, unreasonable things put upon us, most of which are unfunded. I mean, I know that you would not have chosen to simultaneously launch initiatives to evaluate every child born premature in the state of Virginia. Or evaluate every child who might possibly need a Medicaid service. Or redesign your entire business processes so that you could bill for things that probably will not get paid for. Or design and implement an electronic health record to be implemented by staff who on their best days don't really like charting when it's easy. Or, just to make matters interesting, in the midst of all that, to integrate primary health care into your setting. You would not have chosen all of those things, at least not all of them at the same time. And who could blame you? I mean, even those of us who like change don't choose change that could threaten to undo us. And yet, that is where you are. There are many, many complex challenges that you are facing. And this is the moment when you must decide. Will you lead boldly? Will you lead change that matters? I want to remind you this morning for just a bit about 3 things that I think have the potential to make a difference in your efforts to make a difference. The first is to articulate a compelling vision about a future where what your agency is doing then is actually better than what it is doing now. The second is to do what you can to bring others along. And the third is to model the courage that is necessary. If you're going to lead change in your organization rather than simply respond to the things that are happening to you, you have to be able to see a future where what your agency is doing is actually better than what it is doing now. July 2nd, 1954, the California coast was blanketed in fog. 21 miles away, off the coast of Catalina Island, Florence Chadwick was wading into the water because the challenge before her that day was to be the first woman to ever swim the Catalina Channel. Now, Florence was an accomplished long-distance swimmer. She had already conquered the English Channel twice, swimming from both directions. Today, it was the Catalina Channel. The conditions there were rough, as apparently they often are. The water was bone-chilling cold. The wind was ferocious. There were a ton of sharks in the water. Her safety boat had to keep shooting rifles in order to keep her safe. And there was this intense fog. Florence swam and swam and swam and swam. And each time she looked up to get a glimpse of the shore she was headed toward, all she could see was the fog. After 15 hours and 55 minutes, she motioned for the safety boat to pull her in. She was done. You can imagine her dismay when she got into that boat and she discovered that in that amount of time, she had only traveled 1/2 mile. When she talked to reporters later, she said, "You know, I'm not trying to make an excuse for myself. But the truth is, the fog was so terrible. Every time I looked up to see where I was headed, all I could see was the fog." 2 months later, she tried again. It was still a very, very foggy day. But this time, somehow, she saw beyond the fog. She not only accomplished her goal, but she beat the men's record by 2 hours. She didn't get it very far the first time because all she could see was the fog. If the way you are talking about the challenges that you are facing right now, then all you are looking at is the fog. Well, granted, what's being put on you is very challenging, and it is being put on you. But within those challenges, there are opportunities. And if you don't see those opportunities, it's like just looking at the fog. And any vision that you have for the future, if it is not a vision where you can see your CSB doing something better than it is doing now, it's a vision that frankly isn't worth much. Now, the General Assembly is kind of like a fog machine. You know, you think you know where you're going. You're leading in a direction where you've got a clear vision, and then January comes. I had somebody quote me the other day, someone else who'd made this comment. He said, you know, the General Assembly beats us up. Then they give us the job. Then they don't give us any money to do the job. Then they beat us up. Sort of true. But the thing is, we can't just blame the General Assembly for creating the fog. We create some of our own fog. Now, their fog might be called something like unfunded mandates, or maybe even ill-conceived ideas. But our fog, it sounds a whole lot like excuses. Oh, my locality wouldn't go for that. Well, we don't have as much money as the big boards. If the department would just get its act together, if the communities would just cooperate with each other. It's fog. It's all fog. And it keeps you from seeing a future where things can actually be better. There is another shore to which you must swim. Granted, it wasn't your idea to get in the water. But now that you're there, the only two choices are doggy paddle or swim. And if you stay focused on all the reasons why this is so hard, you're just going to doggy paddle in a circle. Your organization will spend a lot of effort over the next couple of years, and you will end up hardly anywhere different and certainly nowhere better. And the truth is, I think that's what fatigues our organizations. I don't think what fatigues our organizations is simply working hard. Because if you work really, really hard and you get someplace that is better than where you were, that's not exhausting, that's invigorating. It's when you work really, really hard and nothing is really any different that you get tired. Believe it or not, and those of you who know him will believe this, George Bronstein at Fairfax is actually adding more on to his staff. He's elected to put some more change into his system beyond the change that is already mandated. And I know, because I've helped work with him and his top 3 levels of leadership, that those top 3 levels of leadership are actually excited about the additional work. Well, maybe not excited, granted, but they are eager because they actually believe that the work they are going to put in over the next year is going to get them someplace substantially better. When you expend a lot of effort and you get someplace that is better, it's worth it. You have to not only be able to see a future where things are better than they are right now, you also have to be able to articulate a vision of that future in a way that is compelling. This is supposed to be an accurate radio transmission between a U.S. naval ship and Canadian authorities off the coast of Newfoundland. The U.S. captain speaks first. Please divert your course 15 miles to the north to avoid collision. Recommend you divert your course 15 degrees to the south. This is a U.S. Navy captain. Divert your course 15 degrees north. I suggest you divert your course to the south. This is the aircraft carrier Enterprise. We are one of the largest ships in the United States fleet. Divert your course now. This is the lighthouse. Your call. If you want people to divert their course, you have to be able to have them truly believe it is the best thing to do. If you are talking to your staff about the challenges that you are facing by describing them as mandated, not negotiable, coming down to us from an authority much higher than we, what you are going to get from your staff is compliance. And I promise you, they will spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to make that compliance minimal. And that's not saying anything bad about them. None of us like to be forced to change. We can change, and we will change. But most of the time, only when we are inspired to do so. You don't want the compliance of your staff. You want them to be fully behind the changes you are making. You want them to believe that where you are going, what you are asking them to do is actually a good thing. You not only have to be able to see a future that is better, you have to be able to articulate it in a compelling way. You have to sell the change. Lisa Moore from Mount Rogers and her staff have done a wonderful job of selling a very bold change in their vocational services. She's going to tell you a little bit about that. And the reason why that initiative has been successful is because Lisa was able to articulate it to her consumers, to her families, and to her staff in a way that they found very compelling. Are you seeing a future that will be better? Are you talking about that future in a way that will inspire others? Are you piercing through the fog of what is there right now to energize your staff about changes that in the end will make them proud? Second point. You must also be able to, be willing to bring others along. I'm told that in India they have a very interesting way of catching monkeys. Apparently, you build a sturdy box and you put in the front of that box a hole that is just large enough for the monkey to stick his hand through there. Inside the hole, inside the box, you put a tasty nut. The monkey sees it, grabs it, and can't get his hand back out through the hole because the hole is big enough for an open hand to go through, but not big enough for a hand that has something in its grasp. The monkey has a choice to either let go of the nut or get caught, and most of them get caught. I know a lot of people like that. You know, they get something they feel really good about and they won't let go of it, even though it seems kind of obvious that they should. They will fight like crazy to preserve what is. And I get that, actually. I mean, we're all like that, right? To greater or lesser degrees. We're doing something we really believe is worthy. We don't want to stop doing it. But here's the thing. If your staff are holding on tightly to what has been, working to preserve what is, they're not so available to help you design what can be. And no matter how smart you are, no matter how bright your board is, no matter how hardworking your leadership team is, you need the minds and hearts of the majority of the people who are working for you. And so you must, if you want to lead a change that matters, you must help them to let go. Mike Gilmore has done just that in Arlington. Alexandria, sorry. He could do it in Arlington, too.
We stole it.
Sydney's been wanting to talk to you about that, actually. So in Alexandria, not everyone was so excited about the changes that were coming, that Mike was to be in charge of. So one of the things he had to figure out early on was how was he going to bring along this group of staff that he needed. When I talked to him about it, he acknowledged that in fact it took a lot longer, given that he spent the time and energy to bring them along. But I will say to you, it might be longer in the short run, but it is shorter in the long run to invest the time and energy to get the support and buy-in of your staff. Now, the problem is, of course, that some staff are easier to bring along than others. If you want to lead bold change, you've got to make sure you don't leave behind the ones who are harder to win over. A number of years ago, they opened a new Panera restaurant in Richmond. My daughter was about 13 at the time, and so she and I decided to go visit it. We had lunch, and then we were driving away. And as we're driving away, she's in the chair beside me, in the seat beside me, and she says to me, "Mom, they didn't set up that restaurant very well." I said, "Really?" She said, "Yeah. I mean, did you see the place where you have to place your orders? It was way too close to the front door, so then the line was like all awkward going out through those doors. And the drink machine, they stuck the drink machine way over in the corner. Every single person had to ask where the drink machine was. I mean, who puts a drink machine there? And the chairs, the tables, they were like all crammed up in one side of the restaurant, and then there was all this space on the other side. And they really need more tables that seat 4 people." And I'm just laughing because she is exactly right. Now, she's 13 at the time, and so she and I have begun these conversations about what she might want to do when she grows up. So at some point, she pauses. She says to me, "Mom, do they have jobs for criticizers?" I said, "Yeah, honey, they're called quality assurance people." I mean, some people are just good at criticizing. You know, you do 17 things right, 17. And they pick out the 3 things you could have done and should have done. I mean, they are amazing. And they're a real pain to lead. I mean, at best, you want to ignore them. At worst, you want to lock them in their offices and throw away the key. But it's a good idea. If you really want to lead change that matters, it's a good idea to avoid those impulses. We tend to write off all the people in our organization who are critical. But that's a mistake, because not all of those people are alike. Now, granted, there are some people who are chronic complainers, and you ought to just ignore them. It's just a lot of negative noise. But there are some other people who are complaining, true, but they are bright, analytical, critical thinking people like my Elizabeth. If they are dedicated to the organization, if they are competent in their own scope of work, and they are offering you criticism right now, you need to find a way to listen to them. Because in the midst of the things they are saying, there are some things you probably need to hear. Not all complainers are alike. That second group I call credible complainers. That is, they have been contributors and they want to be contributors in the future. And they will be if you figure out a way to bring them along. Do you have a plan for bringing others along? Do you have a way to create space for input and buy-in from your staff? Do you know in your organization who your credible complainers are? And are you willing for them to actually impact both the means and the ends of where you are headed? Last point. You must be willing to model the courage that is necessary. I have a friend who works at a CSB, and she was driving home from work the other day. She said traffic was slow, which was a little unusual on the road that she was on. And then she came on a sign that said, "Left lane closed." Like, yeah, of course. So slowly, people began to merge over to the right lane. About a quarter of a mile down the road, there was another sign. This one said, "Right lane closed." Like, she said, I thought, no, this can't be right. Is this right? She said, everybody around in all the other cars, they were looking around like, what is the deal? I mean, could they have closed both the lanes? I mean, what should we do? Should we get off? Should we stop? What should we do? She said, she looked in the rearview mirror. This guy behind her like shrugs his shoulders, like, I don't know. She said, I was trying to figure out what to do when all of a sudden I just started laughing. And I thought, this is a great metaphor for what it's like to be in the CSB right now. Major rerouting of the road, confusing signage, and it's anybody's guess about which way to go. Right? There's a little truth to that. That's why it takes courage to lead in your system right now. When the direction is clear, it might take skill to lead change, but it doesn't take guts. It takes guts to lead when the direction is unclear. When you have to make a decision in a context that is ambiguous. When you have to lead, when all of the information that you would really like to have is just not available. Leading in that context takes courage. All of these panel members, in their own ways, exemplify some of what it takes, some of the courage that it takes to lead bold change. Now, you may not agree with what they have done. In fact, I actually know that some of you don't agree with what they have done, which is exactly my point. If you want to lead boldly, you've got to take in the information that is available, talk to some people that you think might be helpful, most of whom, by the way, will have differing ideas about what you should do. And then at some point, you've got to make the case and decide. And you've got to stand firm behind that decision, even though there will be a long line of people who will come to you and tell you that the decision was wrong and it will not work. You have to be willing to decide things that some other people disagree with. David Coe and the board from Colonial can tell you a few stories about that, about the courage it takes to stand beside a decision that you have made when it is not popular. Not all decisions will win a popular vote, but that doesn't mean they are the wrong decision. You have to have the courage to lead. Now, if that's not bad enough, you have to have the courage to be alone and be right. You also have to have the courage to act and be wrong, because sometimes you will be. If there were no risk involved, it wouldn't be called leading. If it doesn't go well and you can rightfully blame someone else, that's kind of comforting, but it probably means you were not leading. If you want to lead change that matters, you must model the courage that is necessary. You must also have the courage to be honest. You have to be willing to speak the truth. Ed was a grown man who minimized his household expenses by having a roommate. His roommate happened to be female. As time went on, Ed's mother was constantly asking about this relationship. And Ed was reassuring her that no, in fact, they were just friends. Well, one evening, they had Ed's mom over for dinner. She watched the way Ann laughed at Ed's jokes. She watched how Ed's eyes trailed after Ann when she left the room. When she and Ed got alone that evening, she asked again about the nature of their relationship. And he assured her once again that they were simply friends. Dinner was over, Mom went home, and Ed and Ann are doing the dishes. And Ann notices that she cannot find the silver gravy ladle. She says, "I've looked all over the place, Ed. I can't find the gravy ladle. I think your mother took it." He said, "Oh, come on, get serious. My mother would not take the silver gravy ladle." She said, "Well, I don't know what to say. I've looked all over for it, and I can't find it. You need to ask her about it." Okay. So the next time Ed's talking to his mom, he says, "By the way, Mom, we can't find the silver gravy ladle. Now, I'm not saying that you took the ladle, and I'm not saying that you didn't take the ladle. But the fact of the matter is, we can't find the silver gravy ladle." She said, "Well, Ed, I'm not saying that you are sleeping with Ann, and I'm not saying that you're not sleeping with Ann. But the fact is that if Ann were sleeping in her own bed, she would have found the silver gravy ladle." Sometimes we don't tell the truth even when it makes sense to tell the truth. Right? Sometimes the truth is hard to say. There are hard things that have to be said when you are in the business of leadership. They have to be said with compassion. They have to be said with the right timing. But they do have to be said. And if you as leaders are not willing to speak the truth, no one in your organization will. We have to be able to speak the truth about the services we are delivering. Now, it is perfectly understandable that those of you in this room who are responsible for a line of service, it is perfectly understandable that you are invested in what you are doing. You believe in it. You probably absolutely believe in the way you are doing it. I get that. But the truth is that the people who receive your services and the people who pay for your services and the people who observe the delivery of your services, they might have some things to say about what could be better about what you are doing. As leaders in our organizations, we have to be willing to model the courage to talk about both the good and the not so good of what we are doing. If you want to lead change that matters, you have to model that kind of courage for your staff. You have to also be willing to speak the truth about the people you are working with. If you have supervisors or managers or colleagues, senior leaders who are actually not helping the cause but getting in the way of what you are trying to do, you need to speak to that. I've been in a lot of organizations, both public and private, over the last 5 years, and I will tell you that in the vast majority of them, there is a long list of people we are working around. It is like universal. And it makes me wonder, kind of why is that? Why do we tolerate leaders who are creating barriers? Why don't we speak to that and insist they change their behavior? Because I'll tell you what, your staff know. They know who the leaders are who are problematic. And every day you do not speak to them and change their behavior, you undermine your credibility more than anything else can. Leading bold change, leading change that matters, requires a willingness, a courage to be honest. How brave are you? Are you speaking honestly about the things in your services that could and should be better? Are you speaking directly to the people in your organization, the leaders in your organization who really are getting in the way? Are you modeling the courage that is necessary to lead? I wonder what stories you would tell about these years. Will you be able to say 3 years from now, there were a ton of challenges, but I saw the opportunities? We had wonderful, full support of so many people in our organization related to the changes we were making. It was really hard, but I put myself out there and I made the tough decisions. I said what needed to be said. Will you be able to say, it was one of the toughest times in my career, but I feel good about the fact that I was able to lead boldly. I was able to lead change that actually, really mattered. I hope so. I hope so. Thank you.